Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Bainbridge Island Senior Center's Something to Talk About. And today we will be welcoming David Harrison to speak about the current events in the political world. But before we hand it over to David, I'd like to do a couple of acknowledgements, announcements. The first one is, we are sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers memory care and independent living and will be opening assisted living units effective August, which is now, and now accepting residents. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to David.
Thank you, Lena. It's an exciting time. We've been together recently. I think it was just 3 weeks ago that we were together. But there's been a lot happening. So as advertised, we'll be talking quite a bit about the recent indictment of the ex-president, now referred to by the court as Mr. Trump. And then we'll talk a little bit about economics and Joe Biden's decision to run on the economy, which is not without its problems. And then we'll close with a brief discussion of the Latino vote. So thank you again for joining us. As you know, in addition to us, there's people who watch us in between our programs. So that's why it's especially comforting that you ask good pressing questions. With regard to the indictment, I imagine several of you have read it by now. It's 45 pages. It's easy to find on the internet, and it's a stunning document. You could go your whole life and hope that you wouldn't get the chance to read an indictment against the former president of the United States for trying to overcome the results of an election. It hasn't happened before. There were some problems with Aaron Burr. There were some thoughts that maybe he was trying to raise a regiment in New Orleans to overthrow the United States in 1803 or so, although he said he didn't. At any rate, it was treasonous. But since then, our election transfer has gone pretty well. There were also problems, of course, in 1860. Lincoln was afraid he was never going to make it to DC alive. But for the most part, we've got an impressive record that Trump sought to spoil. So I'm not, you know, that the charges are defrauding the United States, obstructing an official proceeding, conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiring against the rights of individuals. Those are 4 felonies. And the interesting thing about this whole thing is there's 45 pages of material in there that are presentation of facts, almost none of which will be contested. That is, such and such told Donald Trump that such and such inference about voting machines was a lie, or that Donald Trump was going around saying that 250,000 more people voted in Pennsylvania than there were voters. And there's quite a recitation by Jack Smith about things like that were about which he makes a factual assertion that these are the facts of the case. Almost none of those will be contested by Donald Trump, because so many people have testified under penalty of perjury that these things are the case. So what Donald Trump is going to do has already been signaled. Interestingly, it's not a surprise. He's going to say that it was his First Amendment right to call the election fraud, rigged. And then he's going to say, and everything he said he did upon the recommendation of counsel, however loony his attorneys were. The interesting thing, of course, is if your attorney advises you uh, to conduct yourself in a felonious way, then there's no attorney-client protection and there's no free speech protection, for the same reason that you can't go on TV and have a Ponzi scheme or things of that sort. So that will turn the whole case around what Trump did or did not believe. And the other day, Bill Barr, former Attorney General, he of the false defense of the Mueller investigation, said that his belief is that Jack Smith has enormously more proof on the issue of what Trump was saying privately than he is offering. That is, in the indictment, there is only one mention of Trump knowing that he lost. And that is, he was talking to a defense official, a National Security Council official, who suggested that a certain national security problem be put off and inherited by the next president. And Trump laughed and agreed to that. So you may remember during the Liz Cheney hearings that Cassidy Hutchinson and some other people said that Trump said to hit them, I can't believe I lost to that guy. It's Bill Barr's belief that Jack Smith has a tremendous amount of evidence that he's not showing, that Trump regularly confessed to insiders, spoke to insiders about having lost. That's a good thing if Barr's right, because we certainly don't want to lose this case, although we could lose it and win a whole bunch of others. I don't think we are going to lose this case. I want to talk about some other notable things in the indictment. But the first is that Bill Barr is taking it upon himself to discuss how impressed he is with the indictment. It's interesting. It's useful to us, as is Mike Pence taking new shots at Donald Trump. You can get so focused on this or that media character saying no minds are being changed that you can believe that, which of course it's not true. In the contest of 150 million voters, of course minds are being changed. It's just they get changed one at a time, and you don't want to fall victim to that argument. At any rate, both Bill Barr and Mike Pence are saying important things, because you can bet that nobody in the U.S. House of Representatives who's a Republican is going to say anything, because it's too dangerous for them. So you'll get some senators commenting. Mostly they'll stay away. And it's important that Chris Christie's out there and Barr. New today is DeSantis saying that Trump's claims that the election was rigged turned out to be false. And he pointed out especially the Venezuelan involvement and voting machines. That's useful, that's nice. It's also tactical for DeSantis. He's still trying to figure out a way to not slip and slide. And it shows, I think, how perilous his position is, that he's playing around on that dangerous ground. Other notable matters in the indictment, for those of you who haven't read it, there's stunningly wonderful news in that indictment about the number of Republican legislative leaders in swing states who refuse to participate in bad behavior. It's quite heartening. People who say, well, I voted for, even to his face, well, I voted for you, but I'm not going to do that because that would violate my oath. And a number of the swing states where they pushed false electors, they had to they had to, under the state's law, basically simulate an official proceeding. And that caused a lot of heartburn for Republican leaders. It's also clear, and Jack Smith makes it a point to point out that a number of the fake electors signed on to being electors upon the assurance by Giuliani and others that their slate would only be submitted to the Senate if they won a lawsuit in that state, putting into question the veracity of the results. So people would sign on in a number of these states thinking, well, that's safe because it's only going to get submitted if we win one of these 64 cases that they lost. However, Giuliani and others ended up, after promising that to fake electors, ended up submitting their certified results to the Senate against the previous council. So that, there, as you know, there's a number of them being prosecuted in Michigan. But if that's true in some states, you'll see Jack Smith not going after them. And it doesn't really matter, of course, to us, but it's interesting nonetheless. A number of you and we have been talking about whether Trump could pardon himself if he were elected. In the first place, he's not going to be elected. In my view, he's not going to be nominated either. But in answer to that question, it's not clear that a president can pardon himself. It's like that pardon would clearly go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would take jurisdiction and rule on it. Could a president call the Department of Justice and say none of the federal charges are tried between now and the election, which is a stretch because I think at least the classified documents case will have been tried by then. A president could cause an attorney general to do that. It would be hard to get an attorney general confirmed if he implied he was or she was going to do it. And remember that in such cases, the judge would have to permit it. So even though they're the prosecution, once the case is underway, the judge has something to say about whether charges are going to be dismissed. The other thing to keep in mind is Georgia is a different story. And sometime this week or next, Fani Willis is going to charge Trump and a number of other people with conspiracy to commit election fraud in Georgia. And there is no such, the president can't pardon himself for a Georgia crime. Neither can the governor. They have a very limited pardon. The only pardon you can get in Georgia is 5 years after you're indicted and convicted. And even then, it's a board of pardons that the governor participates in appointing. So it's heartening to know because Fulton County is a Democratic county, and even if Fani Willis goes, that will be inherited by a district attorney who would not overturn the charges. So that's all what's happening. I'd like to say a little bit about what it means politically, but so we're only halfway through the first segment, but why don't I stop and see if there are questions or comments?
Trump's lawyer is going all over right-wing media talking about, Trump said, all Trump said was that he wanted a pause to go back to the States. He's admitting to the crime. And I don't know what his thinking is, why he's doing that. He's done it on a couple different networks.
Well, it's not true. And Mike Pence said today that that's not true. That's not what went. That's in indictment, it does mention that in a very, very late stage, they started trying to compromise on a pause, but they didn't have any state where the outcome was in question after the Wisconsin Supreme Court turned on that case. So that they're trying to make they would do that because they might be able to argue that seeking a pause would not be felonious behavior. But I think it'll be pretty easy for Jack Smith to prove that he was that, and it's right there in the indictment that he was doing much more than that. I think it's interesting, we have as bifurcated of the media as we ever have. And if Murdoch ever decides, they decided that they don't want Trump, but they haven't decided to tell the truth on this. So if all you're doing is listening to Fox News, then you're being fed a constant diet of this being, a walk in the park.
I didn't listen to it. I heard it reported on another channel.
So I think the case is strong. Notably in the classified documents case, they just made it better the other day because they have videotape. Think about the polls. So there's been a big deal. Media gets on these ideas, and the idea is Trump's support is unwavering. Even the New York Times poll is a little bit more complicated than that. It is true that in a national poll conducted by the New York Times, 54% of the the Republicans polled are supportive of Trump. But if you start looking at an Iowa only poll, it's different than that. But first on the national poll, 37%, or about 2/3 of the 54%, of those polled, the number of them that think Trump committed a serious crime is zero. Have polls at zero. It's like 1,000-person sample. So of those 370 people, none of them think that he committed a crime. The interesting thing about that 54% is 17% who are Trump supporters are willing to consider other candidates, and they're Trump supporters because they think he's got the best chance to win, meaning DeSantis hasn't sold that he's got the best chance to win. And the other 46% are for DeSantis or someone else. So even the New York Times poll doesn't show Trump as the colossus that they think he is. Iowa poll done by the Des Moines Register is very interesting. There it's Trump, I'm going to get this wrong, Trump 43 and DeSantis around 20, and Tim Scott at 9. So it's back to what I was saying to you folks last time. It's all about the lanes. And lane number 1 is DeSantis and Trump. I think DeSantis is toast. I don't see what his way forward is. Trump wins lane number 1. In lane number 3, skipping over 2 for a minute, as our Ramaswamy and Asa Hutchinson and Mike Pence and people that are not going to be president of the United States. And lane number 4, all by himself, is Chris Christie, who's settling a score, and good for him, and who is already qualified to be on the stage for the August 23rd Iowa debate. So that leaves lane number 2, as I've discussed before. Between Tim Scott and Nikki Haley will emerge a possible candidate, depending on whether one of them, probably Tim Scott, could get to like 16% in Iowa. So if it turns out to be something like Trump 37, DeSantis 22, Scott 16, then that will not be seen as some wonderful thing for Donald Trump. And I think that's with further charges coming, I think that's quite possible. So it's all about lane number 2, unless of course we in an emergency they break the glass and select the governor of Virginia. So that's what's happening over there. I think the notable news beyond Trump holding strong and DeSantis showing great weakness is Tim Scott at Iowa at 9% in Iowa. And that's what I said in my blog for those of you who read it. And that is Nikki Haley and Tim Scott have a positive story. They don't come across as jerks. I don't know where DeSantis got the idea that being a jerky person was a good way to run for president. I mean, anybody in the world that could make Donald Trump seem like a nicer guy than he is, it's really got personality problems, and that would be him. So there we stand. I don't think Donald Trump's going to be the nominee. I think 4 indictments will be plenty. In a way, we should wish that he were, because for all this polling of Republicans, it's what DeSantis says is true. It's clear in polling of independents that Trump has lost them. That's why Joe Biden won by 7 million votes. So I think it's interesting. A lot of us were waiting for a long time to see Donald Trump indicted. I will brag and say 6 months ago, I wrote in my blog and talked on this screen about the order of indictments, and that what I predicted has indeed materialized. Questions, thoughts, and concerns on what's happening on indictments and Trump's legal problems? You guys are chatty today. I'm going to say something negative about Joe Biden, so that'll make you mad. So let's move on to segment 2. So we haven't talked about it very much, but it's become apparent, especially in the last month. Oh, go ahead, Bonnie, unplug yourself.
If he were found guilty on some indictment before the election, can he still keep running?
Yes, he can. There's no constitutional prohibition against a felon running.
Okay.
Let the record show that Lawrence and Bonnie and I met each other at Battle Point Park, proving that we are all actually human beings and not just figures on the screen. We were all walking at a very rapid pace. Me with my cane. Joe Biden has decided to run on the economy. So that should, the good news is that Republicans are against what America wants on choice and on Ukraine, and to some extent on guns and on the insurrection. The bad news is that Americans believe that Republicans handle the economy better than Joe Biden. And the worst news is that some of the things that have happened since Biden was elected on the economy are blamed on Democrats and Biden. Most notably, of course, the rate of inflation, which was near 0 when Biden was elected and went all the way up to a yearly rate of 8.5%. Now it's down to about 3%. You can have 80 economists from notable schools sign a letter and say that wasn't the Democrats. It was disruptions in the supply chain and COVID-induced inability to produce, and all of a sudden demand expands and there isn't the supply to keep up, so prices are go higher and higher. And that did happen, but Americans blame Democrats in part for the demand being increased so quickly. Joe will be able to run on the Infrastructure Act and this and that, but running on the economy is a bet that that viewpoint will have changed by next summer. So he's betting that the 3% that inflation is down to will stick or go lower. He's betting that the Fed did thread the needle. It increased inflation, depressed the economy without sending us into a recession. And he's betting that people have paid attention and are going to give him credit for the 13 million new jobs that we've gotten since he was elected. Keep in mind that 10 million or so of those jobs were jobs that went away during COVID. But nonetheless, it's a huge achievement to have them back. We have close to a full employment economy. So what you can say is Joe Biden is betting that 3% or less inflation, some recent growth at real wages where people are getting wage increases higher than the rate of inflation. The 13 million jobs will all create by next summer of the situation where it's a good idea to talk about Bidenomics. Oh, and gas prices will settle. He's betting on all those things. The reason he's doing that is either way, the economy is going to be a big issue. So he might as well, I read somebody saying, why is he taking responsibility and credit for the whole economy? He should not be overstating what a president could do. And that's because he anticipates that that will be a key issue of the election. And so I think he's right to do that. I'm just here to caution us that a lot of good things have to happen for that. He's hoping at least to neutralize it as a Republican argument so he can get back to choice and some other things that we do better on. And that's his aim. I will say before I take questions that I think as good Americans, we should recognize that Joe Biden did not have any business being on any call that Hunter Biden did with any human in having to do with Burisma and Ukraine. His claim, which I believe, is that none of those discussions had anything to do with substantive matters. But among the people who tried to do things for our children, those of us who have children, we all know that there are certain things that we shouldn't do. And the reason Joe Biden knows that he was on that call was to make it more likely that Hunter Biden could get business in Ukraine by showing his relationship to his dad. So that's not good. It's not a felony. It's not good. And we should be sad that he did that. I'm still in the camp of not wanting to run someone who's been a very good president, but who is going to be 82. I'm still camping out that by late fall, that Joe will recede and we'll have a contest. That could happen. I don't know that it's the plan, but certainly if something happens that causes them to fail a little bit more physically, that certainly could happen. And then, as you know, I'm thinking that Gretchen Whitmer will be our candidate. So questions on the economy or my shy advice on who's going to run for president?
I have a question a little bit related. It's related. Joe Biden's approval ratings are low. And I just don't understand why. I'm not sure approval ratings mean anything anymore, because there's certainly enough Democrats in the country to raise his approval ratings.
Yeah, so if it just ran, if you were a Democrat and said you were approved and half the independents did, and none of the Republicans, you'd be over 50%. Yeah, it's Americans form opinions about the economy, and during COVID, a lot of people got saved by the government. And so Americans, if having a job is not an issue. If you have a job, then your approval has to do with how well you're doing relative to what things cost. So the number one disapproval of Joe Biden is absolutely inflation. And if you could strip out inflation from the case, his approval ratings would be higher. And sometimes they dip up into the 40s. And also remember, there was a time when Hillary was Secretary of State before Libya problem, where her approval ratings were like 68%, up close to Michelle Obama's. And that was because she was working hard and the Republicans hadn't tried to take her down. So some of what happens to Biden's approval ratings is the relentless attacks on him. This is different than, say, when Ike was president or even Daddy Bush. It is true that we were a little less. I mean, right now, Kevin McCarthy is talking about an impeachment inquiry, and that at Trump's suggestion. And Kevin McCarthy knows that's bogus. Kevin McCarthy doesn't think that Joe Biden took money from Burisma. He doesn't think it for a minute. We've just got this acid atmosphere. Lucky we elect senators for 6 years, because we haven't even talked about the other dilemma, and that is, after passing the budget compromise, right-wing Republicans are fighting with far-right Republicans over further cuts. They may well close down the government on October 1st, and unless McCarthy gets Hakeem Jeffries to help bail him out. So things are bad in terms of civil discourse, I must say. It is funny how, I've mentioned this before, in the face of this venomous world, if you went to this day, if you went to a hearing in Congress on 70% of the material you cover, you'd be stunned by the seriousness of the discussion and the bipartisan nature of the discussion. To this day, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana was on the tube this morning talking about what to do about, in a bipartisan fashion, about hepatitis C. This stuff still happens, and good for them. Anything on the economy or Joe before we move on?
This is Beulah, and I have a question. It concerns me that the Republicans seem to be lining up to attack Kamala Harris. And what will that do as far as Biden running for president?
Well, I think if Joe ends up being the candidate, that Kamala will be the vice presidential candidate. I think it would, if he's got polls that say that that's somewhat disadvantageous for him, he would also have polls saying that either way, that it would tear the party to unseat her. I think Kamala hasn't been that well served by Joe. Joe had some pretty good assignments under Barack. Of course, he was more of a veteran than she is, but no, I think if he ends up being the candidate, that Kamala will be the vice presidential candidate. I do think that if it turns out to be open season, that she won't be nominated for president. I just don't think that she's gotten the traction that the best of the vice presidential candidates, vice presidents have gotten.
Thank you, David.
It's Reed waving at us.
I am. I was wondering about, when it comes to Kamala, whether, I think I have asked this 3 weeks ago, but it seems to me like she might have a way to shore up the all-important African-American and immigrant votes that Joe is going to need, obviously. And if he's running, I don't know that she's as important as the front runner, but seems like she brings a lot of other kinds of support to the ticket. What do you think about that?
I think Joe Biden feels great about his African-American support. And we're about to go into a little bit of a segment on the Latino vote, but I think he would feel that he would bleed a little bit if he let her go, and he will a little bit if he doesn't let her go. But I don't think that he thinks that she's instrumental with any cohort. Of course, it would depend on who he chose instead. But I think they probably have a good relationship. I don't know how she was supposed to get traction. Certainly doesn't seem like she's been given choice assignments. The other day, she got to talk about DeSantis and slavery, which was good. She did fine. But I think, as I said before in this program, too many times 20 feet behind the president with a mask on. Yes, Maria.
How about a few comments or insights on this no label thing happening?
That's interesting. So John Huntsman and Joe Manchin are most associated with a possible no label ticket. I think it's death to Democrats. I mean, I could imagine two candidates helping fix America by running in the center together. And Kasich thought about it last time, but I think it's a recipe for, it's scary. And so I'm hoping it won't succeed. I think they haven't decided to do it. I think it's a toe in the water kind of thing. I'd be more interested if Huntsman was running for president, just because I think Manchin is an intelligent man, but he worships at the Church of Joe, I think, and not Joe Biden, Joe Manchin. And so that's just my feeling. But no, I don't think it's a good idea. And no, I'm not thinking that it will get traction. But the idea of having a centrist government made up of people from two different parties is not an awful thing. It's just, it's hard to have that happen in a two-party system. If we had a parliamentary system, those kind of coalitions would be formed naturally. The risk is way too great for the Democrats. Manchin's got a tough battle of governors running against him. He might win anyway, but that makes Manchin more interested in running for something else. Any other questions on this segment? We got a few more minutes left, and I want to talk about Latino vote. Sheila, we've gone through 40 minutes and you haven't talked about the Grand Slam home run last night.
Wasn't that amazing?
It was
I was-
incredible.
Yeah, it was beautiful to watch. Let me tell you, he's brand new. He's a rookie, and we love him. We're going to keep Cade.
He did 1,700 minor league at bats. He gets up at the plate with 1 out in the ninth. We're down by 2 runs. Everybody in the world thinks we're going to lose. He's got 2 strikes on him, and he hits the ball 410 feet. So it's worthy of commentary, even in the middle of a political discussion. I was sitting there thinking, I can't.
Yeah, he totally a lovely center field too. I mean, it was magnificent. You know, the other person I haven't mentioned, and I won't even bother, but Pete, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think, as I mentioned to you before, I don't think Pete advantaged himself by being transportation secretary at a time where the airlines are complaining constantly about the FAA. So lastly, let's talk for a minute about the Latino vote. If you go to a friend and say, boy, isn't it exciting that we have Latinos voting strongly for Democratic candidates, that friend will say to you, as well they should, don't take the Latino vote for granted. That's not really any different than the independent vote, the African-American vote. Absolutely don't take the Latino vote for granted. And if you look at Biden's cabinet appointments and federal court judge appointments, you see that Biden's been as attentive to diversity as any president we've ever had. What happened was we used to run, it's thought that Obama got 71% of the Latino vote the first time he ran, and that we're down to about 65%. Some of that is Cuban Americans, as you well know. We don't do as well in Florida as you would think we would, because Cuban Americans have been supportive of Republican policy on Cuba. So that's what's happened there. What's amazing is the percentage of eligible voters in the United States in 2000 that are Latino is 7.2%, and the percentage now is 14.3%. And it's the hugest growth, and it's heavily included in a number of swing states, and it's on average people 8 years younger than white voters. They're younger, they're a little less registered than the rest of us. Part of that has been there's a number of Latino residents who are not citizens. At any rate, it's a gold mine, and you'll know it's a gold mine because you were there on election night when we won Nevada and we won Arizona, and you were there later when we won Georgia, which has 1 million Latino, maybe 700,000 Latino voters. So when you start winning a population of 1 million by 65 to 35, that's 300,000 votes. So 650 to 350. So you just want to remember that this turns out to be monumental. So let's think about what that means. That means we have to do everything we can in Arizona and Nevada in the future, including Senate and congressional races too. In states that are mostly Democratic states like California, we lost a ton of, Kevin McCarthy wouldn't have been speaker if we had paid attention to New York and California. So we could make progress there. It's interesting to think that we might have a little chance against Ted Cruz. There's good candidates there, and there's a mammoth effort for Latino registration and get out the vote. What I'm banking on is North Carolina. So those of you who read my blog know that my blog is helping to open up an office, state effort in North Carolina for Mi Familia Vota, which is a Latino voter rights organization that registers and gets out the vote. So they're underway, and we're boosting them along, hopefully raising $15,000 for that. But for those of us who support candidates, I'm very interested in supporting organizations that register people in 2023 who will vote our way in 2024. So I commend that to you. I commend a focus on the Latino vote in all the states that we usually think about. Colorado, Mi Familia Vota normally works in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, Florida, and they added Georgia, and now they're going to add North Carolina. This is nothing but a good thing. Keep them in mind going forward. If we can roll 65-35 out of a growing percentage of Latino voters, then that's our second secret sauce. The first is choice. As we've discussed before, every time choice goes up on the ballot, hopefully including this November in Ohio, we win the race. We're 6 for 6 in choice statewide votes. And we're going to continue to have that be a special tool. And where referenda are scheduled or there are especially big battles are almost exactly the swing states we need for Joe Biden or whoever else is running next year. So that's my commercial. Joe Biden can and should push the economy. Our two big strengths are ethnic diversity, that it works more and more in our favor, and choice, which is a monumental issue for us that Republicans will keep alive. So it'll be a great issue for us next November. Questions, thoughts, and concerns on any of these matters? Even though you're relatively silent today, except for Sheila talking about Kate Barlow.
I have a question, it's unrelated, so if anybody else has a related question, they can go ahead. Okay, as far as Tuberville holding back military promotions, I haven't heard any talk, but it seems to me that they could fix that with changing the filibuster rules for military promotions. And I can't see why Manchin and Sinema would oppose that limited. I mean, they don't have it for judges and
it's not filibuster that's doing it. They have this courtesy hold situation where one senator of either party can put a hold that's not a vote against, that's a hold to keep it
okay.
from going to the floor. So what has happened traditionally is, I can't remember what it was, but Rand Paul had all sorts of holds on things. And it's a very irritating thing for Republicans who support the defense effort. So what they try and do is make it uncomfortable for someone who continues to hold beyond some kind of symbolic period where they're showing their constituents they care. What Tuberville is holding is because the Defense Department is paying for women to go across state lines to get abortions. And the possible solution there is one of two things. Mitch gets him to stop, which so far he's not done. But the other day, Schumer talked to him about having a suitable floor vote, and that would get the hold to go away. They could, by vote of the Senate, do away with courtesy holds, but all of them it's part of the Senate being in 1970 and then 2020 at the same time.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there are several Republicans doing the same thing. One, I don't know if it's Rand Paul or Marco Rubio or somebody's doing it with ambassadorships, holding those up.
Yeah.
And it's minority is in control in the Senate.
No, just think of the things we've passed in the Senate in the last 3 years. It's very annoying and it hurts our nation. And it's a usually symbolic gesture that involves some concession to the annoying senator. In this case, the nature of what the floor vote would look like is a big issue. Basically, Tuberville will lose that vote, but he wants to get Democrats on record, and he wants to be on record. But I agree with you. It's asinine. It's crazy. It's un-American, and it's part of the culture of the Senate. Final question.
Yeah, sort of along those lines, it looks like you look at those holds and then you also look at you talked earlier about the challenge on the Pentagon budget and the fact that it could actually, I mean, once again, threatening to shut down government for the good of the American people. It doesn't seem like that would be a constituency that's wise for the Republicans to try to push against.
The individual members of the House who they feel, I mean, the New York Times did an article on how Biden won and Kevin McCarthy lost, and how Biden did that tactically. And so you could expect that certain Republicans would take umbrage and look for other places to fight the same battle, which is spending levels. The issue is just what we all said at election time. Kevin McCarthy, with almost no majority, no margins, doesn't have the way to rein in even 15 troublesome Republicans. So it's going to be like this until we take back the House. The way to get through it is basically what they're doing, and that is they'll say that closing down the government is bad for our nation's security, and then they'll try and figure out some way to give those folks a little bit of what they want. What's interesting is there's now 15 Republicans who are unbelievably, they have chosen itemized deductions for state and local taxes. These Republicans are from states that are higher tax states. As you know, when we got the expanded standard deduction, they did away with they put a ceiling on our ability to deduct property taxes and sales taxes, which is disadvantageous to Washington. However, it gets rid of a highly regressive tax deduction for those of us who care about whether the rich benefit. This is a prosperity helper for prosperous people. Anyway, they're in with Kevin McCarthy saying we won't vote for anything unless you give a better deduction for state and local taxes, because they're Republicans from California, New York, and so forth. It's just sausage being made, and they're going to threaten to close down the government, and we'll have an episode around October. But Kevin McCarthy knew last time what he always knows, and that is he's always going to be blamed to be the one to close down the government. Nancy Mace, the other Republican moderates, such as they are saying, if you do this, you're going to kill us. You're going to lose the majority next time because you won't let go. So there is the argument in Kevin McCarthy's head. Do you want to be in the majority or not? If you want to be in the majority, don't close down the government. That's
Well, if they're making sausage, I hope come October, I don't get too worried about trichinosis in the meat.
That's true. We need a vaccine for that. I think I heard another question being asked or not. Okay, so that all sums up to interesting things are happening in America. I wouldn't get too blue over it. I think my belief is that the pharmacist at Keokuk and the insurance salesperson in Montgomery still care about the country. And, it's in this day of the internet, an instant response and instant annoyance and anger. And I think sometimes we forget that we've done pretty well we got a lot of errors that we've made and sins we've committed, but we're still standing. We just indicted a former president. That I might just show that the rule of law prevails. So we'll see you in a.
Sheila has one final comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that thank goodness the two Justins got reelected and they're back in. in
Yeah.
Tennessee, which is
You know,
wonderful.
I'm glad they did. I would note that it's okay for a legislature to have rules as to what you can do on the floor of the legislature. But from that point on, of course, they blew it, they kicked those guys out and they could have figured out a way to handle the passions of the day. It was 6 days after or so after people were killed. So it's too bad. There are ways to resolve these things. It's not wrong to have rules about behavior on the House floor. Good to see you.
Yes, I hope that we can see you early in September. It looks like the 1st would be the next normal check-in.
I will be in Massachusetts, but I'd be glad to sign on.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay.
Okay. Good to see you.
Bye-bye, all.
Bye.